The War That Saved My Life, Chapter 35. Maggie came home briefly at Easter. She was shocked by how much work I was doing, and also by the state the stables and house were in. Her house, not Susan's. "I've told Mum we've got to shut up most of the rooms," she said. I'd learned that Maggie was 12 years old. Top of her form in her current school, though she'd moved to a different school for older girls next year. Trying to keep on as we always have without enough staff is pointless, and Grimes must have help or he'll drop over dead. "It's not that you're not wonderful," she said, cutting off my protests, "but it's ridiculous. You'll drop dead too. She's still paying a gardener. He can help Grimes and we'll turn the park into crops. We're supposed to be doing that anyhow." I nodded. Susan had hired the vicar's gang of boys to dig up most of what was left of our back garden and cut out the bushes in the front. We were planting a big victory garden, potatoes and turnips and carrots, Brussels sprouts and peas. Susan had already planted lettuce seeds on the dirt covering the roof of our shelter. Jamie was agitating for chickens, since eggs were getting scarce. "Most of the evacuees in town are gone," Maggie said. "Mom said so. It makes her feel she hasn't done her job properly. Do you think you'll leave?" I shook my head. "Our Mum thinks we're safer here." I'd written to Maggie several times over the winter, but not once had I been able to tell her about Mam's disappearance. I didn't want Maggie to see me as rubbish, easy to throw away. "Friday's my birthday party," I added. "Will you come to tea? We're going to pretend I'm turning 11. Maggie already knew about my real birthday and my pretend birthday, but she still looked startled. "I thought you were 11 already," she said. "You seem older than 10, even though you're small." This pleased me. "Really? Maybe you should tell Susan. Maybe we should pretend I'm 12. Maggie ignored this. "I'll be glad to come to the party. Home's dreadful, you can't imagine. I've never liked school, but now home's worse. Mum's in a funk all the time." Every time I saw Lady Thornton, she seemed in constant motion, making lists, chivying volunteers, commanding the WVS. When I said so, Maggie grimaced. "Yes, that's her public face. In private, she sort of slumps, and everything about her goes slow and dull. I didn't know she'd gotten like this. When she writes me letters, they come from her public side." "Jonathan had finished his pilot's training," Maggie said. "He had been sent to Stratford RAF base, which was north of London somewhere. Mum can't get past it," she said. "Her brothers died in World War I, all 3 of them, pilots." I shuddered. Maybe Jonathan should have gone into infantry. That's what Dad said, but Jonathan's like my uncles were, dead keen on flying. He always wanted to, even before the war. Mom told him she absolutely forbade it, but he signed up anyway. He was 21, so she couldn't stop him. "If he dies, Mum will die too," Maggie said. "She had 2 other boys after Jonathan, before me. All of them, all 3 were named after my dead uncles. And then the other 2 died of typhoid when they were very small. Then came me, a girl, therefore useless. Mom's been afraid of this war since the day Jonathan was born." "I'll keep an eye on her," I said. "I'll write you if your mom gets worse." "If I can tell she's worse." Maggie nodded gratefully. "You don't know what it's like, being away from home and being so afraid." Then she gave me one of our long, serious looks. "Or maybe you do." "It's not really my birthday," I said on the morning of my celebration tea. "No," Susan agreed. "I'm not really 11 yet. Or maybe I'm already 11. If I thought about it, this made me angry, so I mostly didn't think about it. "Those are the 2 choices," Susan agreed. "I could be 14. "Doubt it," Susan replied. "You'd probably have a bit of a bust if you were." This made Jamie snort milk up his nose. I laughed too, and then I started to enjoy the day. Susan had put a cloth on the kitchen table, and wildflowers Jamie picked in a vase in the center. She had saved up enough sugar from our rations to make a little cake. We had meat paste sandwiches cut very thin, and fresh radishes, and tiny spoonfuls of custard sauce over the slices of cake. Susan made me a new dress from the one that had been Becky's, bright blue like the springtime sky. She gave me a book called The Wind in the Willows. It was an old book, the cover faded and worn. When I opened it, I saw her spidery handwriting on the flyleaf, Susan Smith, and then beneath that, in fresher ink, to Ada with love, April 5th, 1940. With love. It's one of my old books, Susan said, clearing her throat. I'm sorry, I couldn't find a fresh copy in the shops. I looked up. I'd rather have this one, I said. Maggie gave me a little carved wooden pony. It's silly, it came from our nursery, she said, but I saw it the other day, and I thought it looked like butter. It did look like butter. Butter in summer, sleek and trotting through grassy fields. That night I put my new book on the shelf Susan had cleared for us in our bedroom. I put the pony on the windowsill so I could see him from the bed. I hung my dress in the wardrobe next to my other clothes. I had so much. I felt so sad. Early in the next week, Hitler invaded Norway and Denmark. It felt like England had lost the battle, even though I'd never so much as heard of Norway or Denmark before. As spring continued, Germany took over Holland and Belgium as well. Winston Churchill became England's new prime minister. The war, which had begun to feel like memories of our flat in London, hazy and unreal, suddenly came into a sharper focus. Susan had always listened to the news on the radio each evening, but now Jamie and I paid close attention too. There still weren't bombs, in London or anywhere else, but the Germans were much nearer to England than they had been. Everyone thought we would be invaded next. The Air Force built pillboxes around our airfield to defend it. The government gave us 7 rules. Number 1, do not waste food. Number 2, do not talk to strangers. Number 3, keep all information to yourself. Number 4, always listen to government instructions and carry them out. Number 5, report anything suspicious to the police. Number 6, do not spread rumors. Number 7, lock away anything that might help the enemy if we are invaded. Like what? Jamie asked. Guns? Yes, guns, Susan said. Lady Thornton, for example. Her husband has a whole room full of guns for hunting game birds. She'll need to hide those away. We haven't got anything here the enemy would want, Susan continued. We don't even have anything dangerous or valuable. You aren't to worry, she said. Even if the Germans do invade, they won't hurt children. They didn't hurt the children in Norway or Holland. Somehow this didn't make us feel better at all. The rumor in the village was that Holland had been full of German spies, sent in before the invasion to help it go smoothly. The spies were called fifth columnists. I didn't know why. Fresh posters went up on the wall by the station, reminding us that England too might be full of spies. Loose lips sink ships, the posters said. 26 ships had been sunk in March, 10 in April. It was fewer ships than earlier because now fewer ships were trying to get through the German blockade. Jamie started wetting the bed again. Susan marched him over to the airfield to talk to some of the soldiers, thinking they would reassure him. Instead, the men told Jamie that of course there were spies in England. They told him that children were often better than adults at noticing things and that he, Jamie, needed to act like a soldier and keep a good lookout. They told him to report back at once if he discovered anything unusual. I didn't think the Susans expected the RAF to turn Jamie into a snoop. But anyway, he quit wetting the bed. The government asked all the men who weren't already in the army to become local defense volunteers. Stephen's colonel was angry that he couldn't join. A man shouldn't be useless at a time like this, he fumed. It's not your fault you can't see, I told him. We'd run into them at the library. Susan was picking out more books for me, and Stephen was looking for things to read to the colonel. What difference does that make, he said. I still hate feeling helpless. And the boy tried to join up, and they wouldn't have him either. I looked at Stephen in alarm. How old are you? I asked. 13, he said. He dropped his voice to a whisper. I didn't really try to join. I just told him I did, so he wouldn't be disappointed in me. It's nearly a full-time job taking care of him. Who does he think would queue for the groceries if I had to go off and drill? The local defense drilled with broomsticks because they didn't have rifles. Stephen said the colonel had donated his guns from when he fought in the Boer War. They were 50 years old and full of rust. Useless, Stephen said, but it made him feel better. We had to queue for groceries every day now. Meat was on ration, and a lot of other things were hard to find. Onions were so scarce that they might as well have been solid gold. No one had realized that all of England's onions were imported until they couldn't be imported anymore, and onions took a long time to grow from seed. In the middle of May, Hitler invaded France. The British Army had over 370,000 soldiers stationed there. They fought, and the French fought, but the Germans pushed them back and back. Then came June and Dunkirk. Later, people called it a miracle, but in our village, it felt like a disaster.